Hello, Gavin.
Hi.
It's a great honor for me and for PolkaWorld to have you for a short interview.
It's lovely to be here.
It's been 5 years since your first visit to China, and now Polkadot has evolved a lot from 1.0 to 2.0, and with the upcoming Jam chain, and it's so excited to speak with you again as we enter into the new chapter.
Yes, it's a very exciting time.
10 years ago, you released the Ethereum Yellow Paper, which in many aspects ushered in a golden decade for crypto industry. Over the course of the 10 years, how has your perspective changed? Is there some aspects that where your views have changed, and are there principles that you have held onto steadfastly?
Yes, both, in fact. I think in some ways, the principles that I laid out when I first was describing my vision for Web3 have not changed. Indeed, many of the technologies, not just Ethereum, but also Whisper and Swarm, we've continued to look into developing within Polkadot and also in the Jam era. But some of the ideas, particularly those dating back to 2015 and 16, I've taken reflection on, and I think we are able to learn a lot from having seen them in action. In particular, what I've called in the Jam paper, the grey paper, released 10 years after the yellow paper, exactly, almost, is a thing called persistent segmentation of state. So let's break this down. In Polkadot, also in Ethereum, and in possibly several other blockchain systems, we see that they scale, they process more transactions by splitting up their state into smaller pieces of state and then processing each one separately. Divide and conquer. This is a little bit how European politics works. Europe is split into many different countries and they each operate independently. They trade with each other, but they have very, very separated politics, very different to China. Now, this has some advantages. In general, it allows you to process many more transactions. But it also has some very important disadvantages, which reduces the possibility for the interoperation of the different components that sit inside each blockchain. Now, this is true. We see this very clearly in the Polkadot world with parachains, where the interoperation between one parachain and another parachain is essentially quite limited to the language of XCM. This cross-chain messaging format. Now, in my original idea for Polkadot, the idea was that parachains would be sufficiently advanced for their specific domain, their particular problem set that they solve for, that this reduction in interoperability would not matter so much. But the way that it transpired, of course, is that the different parachains don't really do so much differently. They have certain things that they tend to be better at, be more optimized for. But many of them feature some sort of smart contract functionality. Oftentimes there is some sort of DeFi functionality. And few of them actually do a huge amount more than many of the other parachains. Now, this, the trade-off, the advantage that you get from the increased speed through the scale of Polkadot, which does scale a lot, compared to that reduction of interoperability, which I will call synchronous composability, the ability to take two different pieces in the blockchain and bring them together and have them interact in a very tight fashion. This trade-off was an unfortunate one that had to be made at the time for scaling. But now with JAM, I've thought of a better way of doing this trade-off. A way that allows us to reach even greater scale than Polkadot, but still allows a level of potential interoperability similar to Ethereum. Ethereum, I should say, Ethereum L1. Ethereum L2s suffer from exactly the same problems as parachains, but it's made even worse because they don't have a proper way of interoperating. At least with parachains, you have very fast message passing. So parachains can still send messages to each other within about 10 seconds. On Ethereum, it takes maybe 7 days. To send messages between the L2s, which is awful. So it's, this is, I suppose the point that I saw was very important was that although the parachain model is very good in a world where parachains do a particular thing very well and don't need to be very tightly coupled with other parachains. If we are in a world where that tight coupling is very, very valuable and potentially very profitable, then it becomes important to be able to tightly couple these different elements within Polkadot. And this is really where JAM fixes this. JAM massively improves on this by reducing the need to do persistent segmentation of state and instead keeps the state in a big pool or lake of data that sits around JAM. And then the cores of JAM, which are basically these computational elements, the same computation elements which run parachains, are able to draw from this data lake, this pool that surrounds JAM, and take the pieces of data that are relevant at the time that they are relevant. And if those pieces of data happen to be from different parachains or different smart contracts, they're still able to take it into the same core and work together in a very tightly coupled fashion, similar to how smart contracts on Ethereum can interact in a very tightly coupled fashion. Now, this is this is a novel concept in blockchain as far as I am aware. This ability to not be totally coherent in the same way that Ethereum L1 is totally coherent with itself, or a parachain in Polkadot is totally coherent with itself, but also not to be incoherent in the same way that in Ethereum the L2s are incoherent with themselves. One L2 is totally independent from another L2. One parachain in Polkadot is, with the exception of message passing via XCM, incoherent with other parachains. And of course in Cosmos they're not only incoherent but also insecure. They're unable to securely interoperate. Now this with JAM, we're able to avoid this incoherency, but not pay the price of unscalability for the total coherency that Ethereum L1 provides. We end up getting a combination of being scalable, but also being mostly coherent. And this is, I think, a very important innovation. And this is the thing that I would say was one of the most important lessons learned over the past 2 or 3 years.
Okay, so what is your most expectations for JAM? Because, as you mentioned, earlier this year, you released the green paper, a significant milestone, remarkably almost exactly a decade after yellow paper. So do you see it as a foundation of a next era of innovation?
If I didn't, then I would not have spent so long writing the grey paper. So yes, I do, and I think the grey paper combines a number of different innovations. One of which is the one that I just spoke about, the introduction of a concept known as being mostly coherent. And the grey paper actually explores a little bit of even the nature of coherency. How is it that coherency affects scalability? And do we see coherency in other parts of the world, not just blockchain? But we can point, for example, to physics and biology as an example of where coherency has to reduce as the scale increases. For example, in organisms, as our scale has increased, we have to become warm-blooded, because if we are cold-blooded, if we don't have a pulmonary system that basically pumps blood around, then parts of our body are warm and parts of our body are cold, and it becomes very difficult to regulate the temperature. And essentially, in some sense, we can look upon this the change, the move from the Polkadot relay chain to the Polkadot JAM chain as being the introduction of like a pulmonary system, a system that allows for the regulation of an internal state and allows, therefore, the system to grow beyond the confines that we would find if it were cold-blooded and we didn't have heart and blood and stuff. So, yeah, I think one of the other things that's very important that the grey paper introduced is the PVM. Now, as maybe you remember, back in 2014, the yellow paper introduced the idea of the EVM, the Ethereum virtual machine, which was this concept of a computer that was fairly rooted in cryptographic principles. It had huge registers, 256 bits. Normally computers have maybe 64 bits of registers. This one, very big registers, and very limited memory. But it proved to be an important, what would you call it, milestone, I suppose, in blockchain development. It has since seen an awful lot of adoption. The PVM marks, I wouldn't say it's really follows from the EVM at all. If anything, I mean, PVM really traces its heritage to the RISC-V instruction set. But it's very much adapted in order to be as useful as possible within the context of blockchain and Web3. Within Polkadot and the Polkadot relay chain, we used WebAssembly. This has a number of drawbacks. It is not especially easy to make it go fast on modern hardware. It's not especially easy to reduce how slow it goes if someone is attempting to make it go as slow as possible. This is a big problem. And it's not especially easy to provide a means of suspending operation in order to resume it at a later stage. The PVM fixes all of these problems. It's very, very fast. It's even a very relatively quick implementation of the PVM, a relatively simple implementation of the PVM, can go about as fast as the fastest implementation of WebAssembly, the one that like Google and Mozilla have poured huge amounts of effort into making it go fast. And it's possible to in fact, it's trivial to suspend and resume instances of the PVM. and it's much easier to guard against these attack cases where someone can make it go slower than we want it to by choosing the right programs to run on it. This makes it much, much more useful for working within blockchain. So this is one of the key innovations within the grey paper as well. There are a few others that I could go into, but I think these two are the important ones.
Yeah, and you recently embarked on the JAM tour, and continuing your effort on educating people on JAM chain. I remember in 2019 when you first during your first visit with during your first interview with PolkaWorld, you mentioned that the biggest challenges for Web 2, for transitioning Web 2 to Web 3 were educating people on how to use Web 3. 5 years on, you are still committed to this course. So have you set any personal target on how long your educational effort will continue before the true Web 3 adoption?
I don't have any particular timeline in mind. Indeed, one of the things that we've started in the last 2 or 3 years has been the Polkadot Blockchain Academy, an academic level course that runs for 5 or 6 weeks and really tries to educate people from the ground up on Web3 and blockchain principles. This is something that I would like to see flourish over the next years, something that I've taken a very a strong role in myself. And I hope that in the next years we can build maybe even a small campus in which people could be educated according to Web3, the technologies of Web3 and the underlying crypto-economic principles behind it. This is one of the reasons that I, some years ago now, purchased property in Portugal, which can host 70 to 100 people and potentially host academy-like courses where people could come visit, work and study in the various technologies underlying Polkadot and the principles underlying Web3.
So the Portugal going to be the first campus for Web3?
Maybe. And I would hope that in time other campuses can be built. Okay.
Are there any interesting or meaningful stories from the JAM tour that you can share with us?
One of the realizations I had from doing the JAM tour is that it's very difficult. So the original idea for the JAM tour was to go to universities around the world and explain a part of the grey paper in each one, a different part. And then we would be able to take the video and join the video together to create a long video that explains everything about the grey paper.
Okay.
Yeah? Unfortunately, oftentimes I was only given an hour or an hour and a half to do the talk, and it takes half an hour or 45 minutes just to introduce JAM. And then I only have a very small amount of time, and then there's questions at the end. So I only have a very small amount of time to cover anything in the grey paper. And it became clear that this was not such a good idea. And so, in fact, all of the grey paper is explained in actually only 2 of the last 2 lectures that I gave in the JAM tour. One of which was in I think it was here in Singapore, and the other one was in Brussels around the time of Decoded Europe. And I think the one in Singapore was like 7 hours lecture. 7 hours, and the one in I think the one in Brussels was still like 4 hours or so, and so these were long lectures. It took a long time, but it was good. It's really good to get everything covered, and you know, I got to give it to the audience. A 7-hour lecture is not an easy thing to listen to, but they stood there, they stuck it, they sat around and they listened. As far as I know, maybe they were asleep, but no, they seemed awake. They seemed awake. Yeah, so I think I intend to continue the tour next year, and I have a few places that I have in mind to do it. I think one of the places will be IIT in India. I have one of the places is in China. At least one of the places will be in China. And I think the idea is to also go. I think there's a couple of other places in Asia as well that I will talk. And maybe 1 or 2 in Europe, and possibly MIT, but we'll see.
Okay. There's been some drama within the Polkadot community regarding the treasury proposals, as I'm sure you're aware. Of course, there are always positive and negative stuff to such event, but are you satisfied with the status of OpenGov? And does OpenGov live up to your expectations for a decentralized governance?
I would say that my expectations broadly were pretty low. So yeah, it has. And you know what? I mean, yeah, there's drama, but I think if you have a pot of money and you put people around the pot of money, there will always be drama. It's you know, it's the only time that there's no drama is where there's only one person around the pot of money. So I think I'm actually sort of glad that there is drama, because it means that people care, people are taking part. If there were no drama, I would be concerned that actually nobody cared, and there was only a handful of people that cared, that you know were even bothered about deciding how it should be spent. So I see drama as in part a good thing. Now, does it mean it cannot be improved? No, I'm sure it can always be improved. It's knowing how to best spend a budget is an unsolved problem, and everyone might think that they have the answer, but really they don't. It's very, very hard, and I think for a system like Polkadot that is public, it's very important that this discussion happens in public. And so what we call drama really is actually just discussion. Now, it's sometimes very impassioned discussion, but it is ultimately discussion. It is people with different viewpoints coming together and making a collective decision on how to spend things. And I think this is good. Now, I think there are ways of improving the discourse, of making the discussion more efficient. And these are things that the Web3 Foundation is trying to push towards, including decentralized voices. We try to empower people that are rational, well-researched, experienced. And also, we're looking into doing or investing as much as possible into making information on treasury proposals more transparent. So making it clear, for example, the history of the proposer, if they have made any other proposals, if they have any history in the Polkadot ecosystem for delivering or not delivering, where we're trying to make objective analysis of the proposal. For example, is it if it is a proposal that requires payment up front, what are the safeguards against something not happening in time, or something, the proposal not going ahead according to its plan? How is that payment returned? And I think there's still substantial work to do to improve some of the underlying machinery of OpenGov. And I think there are still improvements, for example, by integrating some of the proof of personhood technologies that we're working on at Parity to try to improve the quality of proposals and the potentially also the efficiency of the voting mechanisms. But I would say overall, while there is a lot to be improved, the fact that there is quote unquote drama is actually a good sign, and not in a public system, a good sign, not and that quietness would I would not interpret as being a good signal.
But the data says that the treasury funds only will last for 2 years.
So this isn't. This was a rather disingenuous report by Alice and Bob, and it's not. It's not a particularly informative one. The report specifically says that at the current rates of spending, the Treasury, with its current amount, would deplete after 2 years. However, its current amount of spending is, many of these proposals are proposals which are budgeted for substantially longer, very long time, like a 12-month budget. Some of them were passed on the basis of a much higher price. And it doesn't generally take into account the effect of the replenishment into the Treasury from staking rewards. It doesn't take into account the current expected changes to Polkadot tokenomics, which would see of the 10% inflation, a fixed 2% go to the Treasury and 8% go to validators. And although Alice and Bob didn't do this, many of the commentators mixed up the Web3 Foundation's treasury with the Polkadot on-chain treasury. Many of the programs are paid for by the Web3 Foundation, and its treasury will last substantially longer than 2 years. This nuance was lost in many of the media reports that said Polkadot, 2 years. And we must remember that in the early days of Polkadot, the treasury was never spent at all. The treasury, it was only the Web3 Foundation that was funding Polkadot's development, and the Web3 Foundation continues to fund a lot of Polkadot's development and can continue to fund Polkadot's development, as was reported by the Web3 Foundation only a month or two back at roughly the time of this report, for many years to come. So I personally don't see any big issue with Polkadot's financial future, knowing, as I do, the state of finances of the Web3 Foundation. And I see Polkadot's treasury as certainly something that we should be cognizant of when looking into spending decisions. I think it is probably fair to say that there have been some questionable spending decisions in the past year or so, but not something that needs an especially I don't think it's something that we need to be especially concerned about, merely something that we should be aware of. So I would modestly thank Alice and Bob for pointing out that indeed at current spending rates, we may want to be concerned that of treasury outflows not matching inflows. But I think the panic that ensued following the report is uncalled for, it's unfounded, and that Alice and Bob's contribution to the cause of that panic is rather unhelpful.
Okay, then Alice Bob can get more famous.
I think he's famous enough in Polkadot now.
Okay, and I think to wrap up our interview, my last question is that if Web3 were achieved Web3 adoption, a widespread adoption, what would be the first thing you would like to accomplish? And have you ever imagined a day that you might step away from this industry?
I haven't imagined a day where I would step away. I think it's a very important mission, and even if someday comes where I do less day-to-day coding, I think I would still retain my role as much as I'm invited to anyway, in guiding and helping direct where the technology goes. I think, unfortunately, adoption it's a difficult thing, in part because many of the principles of Web3 are not keenly felt yet by large swathes of the global population. I think some more than others. In Europe, where which has traditionally been, where I've been wandering around, life is largely quite comfortable, and people don't like it. What Web3 protects against is not so relevant for sort of normal people. Similarly, I think blockchain's primary usage, maybe if we are charitable to primary usages, have been speculation, asset speculation, which is essentially a form of gambling, and cross-border transfers. And I think we really need to start uncovering mass viable use cases beyond these two before we will see serious adoption, at least in the consumer sphere. It might very well be that in the enterprise sphere, adoption happens sooner because it's made by relatively few decision makers, and if a profit motive is there, there's no great reason why enterprise won't adopt. But I think that adoption will be very much shielded from consumer society. I think that adoption will be, in essence, driven by a profit motive to maximize the bottom line of companies, and they will not be, they will not expose their consumers to the sort of true gains of Web3 technologies, the freedoms that it can bestow on people. So I find it also a very exciting space to be in, still, primarily because it can deliver this kind of disrupting social benefits and provide a substrate for conducting very interesting, novel social experiments. And, Polkadot's already, Kusama particularly, is playing around with some of these things and has played around with some of these things in the past. And one of the things that I'm most excited about, I mean, obviously from a technological point of view, JAM I find very exciting, very. But from a social point of view, one of the things that I'm most excited about over the coming years, and one of the things that's really keeping me in in is individuality and this concept of civil resistance, solving the civil resistance problem. And I think that with this, we do stand a chance of, or let me put it another way. I think that this provides a route to mass adoption, which has not yet been tried. It provides us with a toolkit for a number of possible products, any one of which could lead to mass adoption. And this is really why I've dedicated so much of the last 18 months or so of my time to developing as frictionless a system that still is Web3 in nature, that can deliver this concept of individuality, proof of personhood. And it will be launching in the next few months, and I'm very interested. I'm hopeful that it will gain enough of enough adoption, and I'm very interested to see where that adoption can lead us to in attempting to provide a service which is relevant to not just the 10 or 100,000 people in crypto, but the tens or hundreds of millions of people that are interested in cutting-edge technology.
Okay, cool. I think that's all for our interview today, and thank you so much. Thank you for your time, and
thank you.
Yeah, and welcome to China.
Cheers.
Okay.
Thanks, Sherry.